Most heartfelt greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlethems. I eagerly welcome you to Sturgeon's most premier station, Dusklight Radio, hosted by yours truly, the rugged but regal, rounded but reckless, and tortuously tempting Everett J. Blackwell. Now, I know you're used to my usual spiel, but in order to bring you more transmissions, we'll be providing a slightly shorter, but still original version for non-Sturgeon, or in this case, non-feature-length stories, to ensure we can still provide our unique Dusklight brand, thank our patrons, and, most importantly, promote the authors we work with. If you're new here, first of all, welcome. You can, as always, skip these intros using the timestamp below. Now, this very special tale is the beginning of everything. The Graves We Dig is a story written by T.J. Lee, chronicling the beginning of the events of the experimental series, You Will Remember What Happened Here. That's right, folks, we decided to go all the way back and do chapters 1 through 3 before continuing. He wanted to make sure that all of you know this is a series. This part can be read and enjoyed on its own. The playlist is linked below, and you can check it out in order. Oh, and I hope you're enjoying the new theme. We, unfortunately kept getting targeted by a white hawk every time we used the old one. Kinda made production a nightmare. So we switched to a more eldritch sound, and now we're all hunky-dory. Please stick around after the production for full credits and some thoughts. Special thanks must be given first to Mandy Mo for the original beauteous image you see of me when you look at our page, to Sir Gorky for the brand new rendering of yours truly, and the truly accurately horrifying rendition of our humble studio. Then to Invato Elements for the sound effects, Epidemic Sound for all of their music sourcing, and to Dark Somnium for being such a gracious yet terrifying sponsor of the channel. If you enjoy these intros and want to see more, please ensure you've got notifications on and leave a comment for every video you encounter. With that, the sun has set and dusk has crawled into the studio once more. Whether you're working, prepping to sleep, or evading the formless void that will one day consume us all, Blackwell is here to soothe your ears and captivate your soul. Now, close your eyes and take a deep breath. The scene has been set and the light is on. It's time to walk towards it. Any person possessing a slither of a conscience should feel a responsibility for those around them, even those we only come into contact with for a short period of time. Within those fleeting moments, we behoove responsibility for their well-being and our own. This is a building block of society, and one that I, Phineas A. Gerhardt, take extremely seriously. Which is why I must confess to the horrific negligence I have undertaken this past month, and the punishment I am likely to face in the coming hours. I am, by all accounts, dead already. I long held a fascination with death. In fact, I seldom recall a time I did not find myself ostensibly connected to its decaying and spindly arms. In my near 30 years of consciousness, I not once felt I was truly among the living, and, in fact, concluded early on this was simply a sort of limbo for my soul to reside within. Perhaps that is how I became the Gravedigger for my village, a small but well-connected group of bodies that congregated, proliferated, and eventually ascended to whatever lays beyond the veil. I found the work deeply gratifying and felt not only that I was best equipped to undertake it, but that those crops left behind wanted me to be the one to tend to them, to prepare them for the coffin, and to help them see what I saw. Families would often remark on my disheveled state, my tattered and foul-smelling attire that evoked the scent of death, my unkempt hair and skin that seemed too worn, chapped and wrinkled for a man of my youth. But they quickly saw past such oddities and thanked me for the great care with which I tended to their loved ones. Of course, if the issues within started and ended with my unusual habits, we wouldn't be here. No, The truth is far harder to comprehend for those who shy away from death's loving embrace. For I am able to commune with its wants and needs during the waning hours when the moon is obscured and the eyes of God himself are blinded by its brilliant luminescence. When a body is laid to rest in my commune for the dead, I bring it into the mausoleum of the family name, lost to time for preparation. There I lay with it and allow my unconscious mind to reach out for the spectre in the realms that lay between. My still living, dullard family that lived atop the hill in a building steeped in opulence did not care for such practices, calling them uncouth, barbaric, and downright insidious. But when one is so blinded by their own avarice and disconnected from the spiritual, it's unsurprising they would deign to call the most pure connection of life and death an act of, quote, demonic institutionalization. I did not recall the first time I communed with the creature in between this world and the next, but they did not frighten me on first contact. Perhaps because, despite their odd structure, their frame was hidden behind a thick veil. Their body was not built for conversing, the jaw struggling to move and tongue straining to click in a manner my mind could understand. But we would come to an agreement. For as long as I slumbered in the abandoned sepulchre, I would be granted passage to the true realms when this body eventually failed me. Perhaps it was a sixth sense that allowed me to understand the risks involved in this unholy arrangement. But all beings starved long enough shall eventually turn on those they trust. I did not wish to find out what would happen to me if I faltered. In time, I became adept at traversing the dreamscape, eventually able to bring the souls of those who had died in my company to the spectre for its own twisted desires. I did not dare to ask if it was for feasting, judgment, or an invitation for such things that were far beyond my understanding. I cared only about doing the work efficiently and properly. For a time, things were good. I felt purpose in every day's toil and adulation in every night's commune. My family desired for me to see a professional, to understand there was more to this world than living as a walking corpse, as they put it. But I brushed their concerns aside as the ramblings of the uninitiated and continued my work. Then the bodies stopped turning up. A mixture of longevity, job closures forcing a large swath of labor workers to migrate to the big cities such as Sturgeon, and low birth rates were major contributions to the decline of burials. And before I knew it, an agonizing 3 months had passed without a single one in Dondella. Communes with death each gradually transitioned from loving and familiar to unsettling, tense, and without warmth. Each night, fear began to mount that they would take me if I continued to come up empty-handed. But, as if it were fate, a man showed up at my shack on the border of my commune. He obscured his face, his sallow skin peering out from beneath strips of fetid fabrics, marked by age and filth. His tall figure clad in a dark trench coat that I admit captivated me. In truth, I could not tell if they were man or woman, but the way they commanded a room struck an admiration within me. Perhaps I wished to see them as a better version of myself, and referred to them in the masculine as a result. They asked to be let in, and though I did not care for the living in great capacity, I felt compelled to open up, literally and figuratively, to this alluring individual. When I say that my home is a shack, I am not being facetious. It is derelict, rife with keepsakes from those I have laid to rest who part with them as offerings in anticipation of meeting death. I have no need for anything beyond the basics, no desire for company, and prefer to sleep in the mausoleum. But, on occasions such as this where there is no offering to give the waiting dead, I argue it is wise to stay away from their looming gaze. If the visitor had issues with my home, they did not let on as they took in the surroundings before being guided to a chair in my sitting room. The room felt like it was shaking as they sat down opposite me, the very air itself flickering and dancing.
"You are doing divine work here, Phineas,"
they remarked. Every syllable pushed past their lips was given the utmost attention and care, making my skin shudder with excitement.
"But it is clear you are lost in the fray and are in need of help. A true man out of time, it seems. Fortunately, that is why I am here, to put the pieces back together."
They extended a hand, thick and calloused with scars strewn across the palms like a battleground. Following the road map of their veins, I spied small chinks in the armor where vulnerabilities peered out. A slew of hesitation marks there, red pustules where hair had been torn out, signs of a battle raging within and without. All coming together to paint the picture of a person constantly at odds with the very skin they wore as my hands stretched to meet their own. When I gripped it, I felt an inexplicable energy radiate from them, and as their gaze met my own, I saw something shift in the corner of the room. "You are not alone, stranger." The words burned as they left my lips and my eyes skittered in my skull, desperate to avert themselves from the thing behind the stranger. It was long, spindly, hidden behind a veil. In that moment, it could be mistaken for a sibling of my own emissary to death. If the stranger was rocked by my revelations, they didn't show it as the handshake ended and the image left my sight.
"The fact you can see it, too, shows me I have come to the right place. My name is Gael, and I find myself in need of your services."
They looked around my abode as they spoke, energy still radiating off of them. "You have a body that needs tending to? Rites to be read before burial. I have plots available." I prepared to stand up and show them, but they held out a hand and, like an obedient dog, I sat down and kept quiet.
"Your reputation as a purveyor of the pervasive precedes you, Phineas. Not many in this fair town don't know of the Gravedigger, who not only communes with the dead, but believes he shepherds them to the maw of the beast itself. I'm told that you eschew normal living with the opulence that your family name brings, and instead dedicate yourself to this macabre behavior. Is this true?"
My tongue lolled around in my cavity like a slug with salt on its back. My eyes stung from lack of blinking, and every pore of my skin bubbled with apprehension. Was this interloper about to cast me out? Was this my fate for not bringing fresh souls to my communes? "Yes, it is. I assure you, I am under no flight of fancy or delusions of grandeur. I may be different to the masses congregating in the petri dish they call a town, but I am of sound body and mind. I simply serve and ensure my place when this flesh prison fails me. Is that so wrong? To want to live in a way that pleases the soul as much as the body?" I stood with a start, perhaps the first time my heart had raced in as many months. A brief reminder that this body has its own drumbeat to march to, totally separate from my soul. It is petulant, and I expected the stranger to match my outburst. Instead, I saw a smile eke out from behind the fabrics covering their face, something sinister glimmering within it.
"I take what you do with the utmost sincerity and admiration, Phineas. I do not wish to mock your practices, but rather help enhance them, in exchange for helping my mission."
They slowly rose from the table and turned away from me, unfurling some of the fabric around their face as they spoke.
"I am not what I once was, disfigured by the heavens above for mistakes as a youth. Now I serve them in the hopes they will one day return me to the way I was. I must find those who have strayed from the path and either help them see the truth or send them to a higher judgment before this can befall them."
I dare not describe in this journal what I saw when the figure turned, only to remark that on this earth no such creature should exist or be allowed to walk with such turmoil present. Features displaced and some vacant, An artist with the most boorish mind, stooped in bizarre ideologies and assisted by herbs that opened the third eye, could not conjure such monstrosities. I somehow held my nerve, and instead looked away after a moment, allowing them to cover back up. I do not know if I can help you, I finally croaked, pushing back bile down my gullet. I prepared the bodies and carried the souls. I know not what happens to them after that. To meet a fate such as this.
Be not afraid, Phineas. I am simply trying to carry out the message of the Divine's will. Fortunately, you can help me with that. By bringing those I am tasked with seeking out, you can help me heal them and set their souls free. In return,
they walked over and handed me a small piece of parchment, faded at the edges and the crimson lettering still shimmering in the arc of the lamplight.
I will help you become even closer to your emissary. Closer to death itself.
If lightning were to have struck outside at that very moment, I would have considered it an omen of the things to come. Alas, the night was serene and cold when I gripped their hand and agreed to the terms, never asking why they needed someone like me in the first place. From that moment forward, all bodies brought to my garden were already encased in coffins made from obsidian mahogany, a thick seal around the sides and iron chains looped around from top to bottom. Whatever was inside, Gael did not want it ever breaking free.
Acquiring them was challenging, but not impossible. Those who have strayed too far from the path and let the sickness consume them met a fate in life even worse than my own. They become demons incarnate. It takes all of my not inconsiderable skill to bind and subdue them. Now comes the hard part.
Gael pointed to the mausoleum, and a feeling of foreboding crept its way into me, nestling in the place that anticipation once resided.
We shall place the coffin in there. You will slumber alongside it and conduct your commune, cleansing it of sin and bury it in the waning hours before dawn. Should the grave remain filled come sunrise, we will have delivered their soul.
I am not a foolish man. Socially inept, perhaps, but never foolish. My instincts screamed foul, but one look from Gael's piercing eyes swayed me and assured me this was the right thing to do. After all, perhaps I was simply concerned over the prior lack of offerings. Yes, I thought, that must be it. Doing as instructed, we hauled the coffin into the mausoleum and propped it up against the far wall. The limestone screamed as the jagged edges of the coffin scraped against its skin. By the time our task was complete, the sun was beginning to set and Gael looked eager to take their leave. You're sure this is the right thing to do, Gael? What about their friends, their kin? Surely they want a chance to pay respects. I felt it was only right to ask. This was still my job, my lot in life. Gael gripped at their tender arms, hesitation marks still raw and seeping.
I assure you, no family will want to see them in their sorry state. To that end, I chained their coffins shut, so as not to invite unnecessary curiosity. I will return in 3 days with another.
They turned on their heel and left for the gates, the gravel submitting to their proud steps before they halted in their tracks. And something shuddered underneath Gael's shoulder blades.
But a word of advice, Phineas. The night can play tricks on your mind. Demons can too. Ignore anything you may hear or see outside of your commune. I'd hate to have to bury you, too.
Something in those parting words pulled at my guts and dropped them through the floor. Struck by a fear I had not experienced since I first properly communed with the visage that hung in the spaces in between. I did not want to cross this stranger. The night came and brought with it a renewed sense of foreboding. The once inviting mausoleum, where I joyfully prepared the bodies of the recently deceased and peacefully slept beside them, now felt akin to the open mouth of a malevolent beast ready to bite down the moment I showed my weakness. Was this how others felt around the domiciles of the dead? I sat in the crypt facing the coffin, attempting to make sense of the etchings scratched across its surface and the sigil in its center. They bore no resemblance to the language I spoke, or of those held within the books my parents encouraged me to read as an adolescent. In time, my mind drifted to halcyon days up on the hill, living in the manor house with my siblings and shying away from their boisterous activities, instead opting to peruse every ancient novel my father's library had within it. Even my vernacular, though outdated by modern standards, derived from those tomes I held as close to my heart as if it were a dear friend known since birth. Being accosted by my peers and mocked by relatives meant little to me if I was able to lose myself in the worlds they held within. I paused my musing as a faint scratching could be heard echoing around the small burial chamber. It was rhythmic, constant, and incessant. My ears strained to pick up the source, and eyes inevitably fell on the coffin. The words of Gael hung in the air as a tangible threat greater than anything I had experienced. Before long, I saw a large rat race past my feet and into a small crack on the far corner, calming my nerves and allowing me to regress to the realms of childhood, a far more applicable location than this, with several hours still to go before my commune. It was during one particularly raucous evening that my connection to death truly began. My younger siblings, twins, were caught in Father's study by our elder brother Cochrane. He insisted he saw one of them making the other float as they, quote, cast aside their old identity in favor of one beguiled by the nameless one, end quote, before dropping their twin to the ground in a heap and suffering a seizure. I was engrossed in a book, as always, but even I felt the need to check on the situation and ensure all was well. Hushed voices spoke about the twins. What would befall the nameless one and that of their sister Lucinda? Would she forgive her sibling? Could any of the family forgive such a creature? Mother fretted and father dithered. Both then drank to assuage the guilt of raising children that largely failed to meet their exorbitant expectations. For a time, things were swept under the rug. Lucinda would suffer only bumps and scrapes, but her sibling would comment every night on something visiting them in their dreams. We didn't dare to use their new identity around them, lest we invoked the monstrosity within. Neither even now on paper do I risk it. But there was an abject sadness in their face when we failed to recognize what they'd become, as if they were proud of such a thing. Nevertheless, we inquired and ascertained that whatever they perceived was visiting them was simply doing so in their dreams. Cochrane was of an age where directness and bluntness were all he knew, and so he took to labeling our sibling as a freak, communing with demons. Regrettably, as the night terrors persisted, Father actually listened. I kept silent about my own nightly visits from the entity behind the veil, and Lucinda refused to elaborate when her twin pressed her to just tell them you saw it too. And whatever we as a family knew was going on was instead chalked up to one thing: them. I still recall the night they were taken. Under the cover and shame of a twilight sun did the emissaries come, cloaked and hidden to ensure no revenge could be enacted. They assured Father and Mother that they would take care of the issue, they'd be safe, and would one day return as the child they once knew. They kicked and screamed until a cloth was placed under their face and their fragile body fell limp. They were barely 15 years old and looked like a child in the arms of these gargantuan beasts draped in fine clothes. In that moment, as I peered up from my book, I saw that very same visage of death I'd come to know in my dreams, with arms wrapped around both individuals and peering down at our sibling. I said nothing as they were taken away, never to be seen again. I would come to find they'd gone missing from the main building soon after arriving, and a search party was underway. Mother fell into a deep depression, and father denied any wrongdoing. Cochrane slinked off to the family retreat, and Lucinda, well, she was never the same. A broken family before, and an irrevocably shattered one after. We were never meant to be together, and my life's work ensured I had a path to follow that detracted from theirs, even if my father would forever remain irascible over the entire affair. My melancholy stops here, for a time, when something stirs me from my sonder, and my neck snaps to attention so quick that I damn near give myself whiplash. Someone is knocking on the coffin. A soft rapping that comes from weakened knuckles, but unmistakably there. I freeze like a rodent caught in the still widening eyes of a cat ready to pounce, waiting for the knock once more. I lean in closer to the fine wood and listen for breathing, words, or any kind of communication. Regardless of Gael's request, I cannot ignore someone's pleas for help. I am a gravedigger, not a murderer. As my ear is a few inches away, the chains rattle against the wall of the coffin as something horrifying bleats out from within. Guttural shrieks and inhuman howls of pain emanate from its structure, the boom rattling around the contours of the inscrutable tomb and creating a cacophony of suffering that threatened to burst my eardrums under the weight of its agony. Only as I am brought to my knees do I see the true source of the noises. It is shambling, shuffling in place as if standing on tired legs and bearing the weight on one to the other to ease the burden, swaying softly like a praying mantis ready to strike. Small, perhaps 4 feet tall, a bulbous head with a skull that stretches up like a spire. The light flickers as features come into place and immediately resign their positions from my view. Hollow sockets too deep to bear eyes, teeth as black as the coffin's obsidian material that jut out from where canines once resided. Large nostrils attached to a small bridged nose. The skin is a bubbling, peeling mess, allowing blue and pink flesh underneath to peek out. It was a monstrosity beyond what I can accurately convey, and it hobbled towards me, within striking distance after just a few steps. I was paralyzed to the spot, unable to fight back or flee, begging my lord's retinue to sweep in and save me from oblivion.
Stay back! If you still have intelligence, then know I am not your enemy. I do not bring you harm!
I shrieked, staring down this beast as it stood still at the shout of my voice, perhaps itself shocked by my actions. We stood in tenuous silence for a few moments before the heavy thudding of the coffin broke my stare, and I instinctively turned on my heel to stare at it. Immediately realizing the grave mistake I'd made, I turned back, expecting the brute to be at my throat. But instead, I was met with a sight that shook my soul to its very core. Lucinda, floating in the air as the walls of the crypt crumbled away, like the fragility of time itself, and gave way to a landscape I'd become all too familiar with over the years, my nightly communes with death. Her eyes were rolled back in her head, and her neck bent at an angle so fierce her vertebra poked up through the skin like a weed, threatening to pierce the soft flesh that kept it contained. Her palms were outstretched and covered in blood stemming from long slashes on her forearms, legs twitching beneath the knees as toes curled over. "Sister?" I choked on the words and the sentimentality I'd long cast aside, but to see someone I loved in this manner, it is enough to distill the bile in the hearts of any man and allow blood to pump anew. She did not speak before her body was pulled into the veil that enshrouded my lord, her expression of grim acceptance never wavering in spite of her broken body. Instead, she opted to send a message with actions over words. With arms moving like that of a stiff wooden doll, her index digit outstretched behind me to a burning house on the hill. Our house. I awoke with a start in the cavernous cold of the crypt, knees buckling under the ache. The first thing my eyes met was the unforgiving structure of the coffin, dutifully propped up opposite me. My first thought upon waking was one that carried with me until I saw Gael once more. Who was in the coffin? Gael looked at me for a moment before shaking their head and chuckling.
I take it they showed you something you didn't like, Phineas.
They remarked with nary a moment's hesitation, as if expecting my rattled demeanor. I nodded and they sighed.
I suppose that's to be expected. Did they meet your emissary, at least?
Again, I nodded, opening my lips to ask the same question before Gael held up a heavily bandaged hand.
They were nobody, an unfortunate victim caught up in something bigger than themselves. They sought amnesty for their sickness and instead invited in something insidious. All you must know is they are now at peace. Now,
Gael pointed to another coffin they'd brought.
I trust you can do this again.
What choice did I have? Like a docile servant, I nodded and Gael patted my shoulder before leaving with the same promise of return in 3 nights. Telephoning the home yielded nothing, and our butler simply told me the family were fine and on a sabbatical of which they would call once they were home, before promptly putting the phone down. Perhaps it is in my nature to be distrusting, but I could sense his taciturn behavior even after a lengthy absence from conversing with one another. Something was wrong. I won't waste valued pages repeating the same events as before, for they were largely unchanged, save for the intensity with which they occurred. Though I will note 2 distinctive differences were within the final moments of my commune with that second coffin. As the malformed monstrosity made itself known, it crawled towards me from the top corner of the crypt, dragging the torso of something viscous and foul-smelling trailed behind them. Milky white eyes bleached by chemicals bore into my soul as a jagged and yellow tongue lolled out of their distended jaw. I did not cower this time, instead backing towards the coffin and remaining patient that soon the commune would take me away. As my back hit the coffin, something squealed within and pounded vigorously for release while a wet substance dripped onto my shoulder. Looking up, I saw where the other half of this creature has been hiding. Another face, far fouler than the first, smiled at me with a lipless hole filled with rotten teeth before leaping towards me. Shrieking and turning away, I again was greeted with the sight of a sibling floating in front of me. Cochrane, his skin stripped from his body and leaving a red paste in his wake. It did not take a medical mind to see he was fraught with damage. Muscles still moving, sinews stretched and tendons squeezing as the twisted structure that was once my brother spoke to me before the veil enraptured him and my lord chaperoned him away. Come home, Phineas. I did not dare to speak of this to Gael, nor on the 3rd and 4th occasion when a visage of my parents appeared, both clad with the scars of torture and guilt. Gael had changed, becoming a person whose presence I began to meet with dread, scorn, and disgust. Each time I met them, their body grew more decayed, fetid, and rotted. I would spot various packets of filth adorning their clothing. Mud, fungal, and fecal matter from the streets was practically growing on their body. If they were aware of the detritus, they took no notice as they sauntered into my home on the final occasion, now a swagger in their step. It was only after multiple sleepless nights and a rapidly diminishing sanity that fear gave way to frantic anger and a desire to see an end to this.
Gael, I barely sleep anymore. My dreams are filled with visions of my home burning, despite repeated assurances to the contrary. I have seen things that will haunt my soul long after it departs this body for new pastures. You will not tell me anything of the coffin's contents, and I am no closer to my lord than I was when we started. Do not think me ungrateful for the offerings, but something feels wrong. The air in the room was thick, hot, and foul as my words reached a fever pitch. If you cannot tell me the nature of this arrangement at this late stage, I'll have no choice but to...
To what, Phineas? To tell the authorities, to tell the townsfolk. What would they do? You think they'd listen to the ramblings of a madman out of time? A man who, racked with such unimaginable guilt for his actions, regressed to the point of a hermit and communes with the dead.
Gael laughed, a hollow thing that reverberated from their belly.
You are so feared and vilified that they dare not come to you unless it is with their dead. You are a murderer, Phineas. None shall offer you aid.
I did not understand. My rage simply built and I became inconsolable.
I have done no such thing, Gael. I offered you assistance when you came here. I was courteous and kind in spite of my disdain for the living.
I slammed a fist on the table, signaling for them to leave. They stood up, but made no movement as their eyes gleamed from behind the fabric.
Do you know why you detest the living so, Phineas? Because the first thing you said after the fire was, I wish I was dead with them. Cotard's syndrome, they call it. Though I think in your case, it's closer to survivor's guilt.
I felt the room spin as their voice began to feel distant, memories flooding my vision.
You said nothing the night your sibling was taken. Nor did you say anything when that fire was started in their bedroom, the one that consumed your home and your parents. You were always a casual observer of life's events, the definition of a wallflower stuck in a constant state of monocopsis. You are a fish out of water, watching everyone else swim comfortably well.
I fell to my knees and felt sickness overtake my body, turning my skin sallow as I struggled to breathe. The fire. I remembered the feeling of black smoke choking my lungs and sapping the life from me. The emissaries slowly pulling their veil apart as I resisted with all my might.
No, I did not cause the fire. I am no murderer.
I choked, barely holding back bile as Gael kneeled down in front of me.
Even if that were true, you most certainly are now, my friend. But all of that will go away by tomorrow, because you are going to complete one final job for me, and we will part ways as you requested. I will get what I want from the ritual, and you will get this.
I look at them and see a medallion with brilliant markings, a symbol of the Ouroboros snake at its center, and the light of a black sun shimmering down over it, burning its skin.
I will allow you to reach the state you desire most of all when communing with the dead. Your sins will dissipate, and you can finally be among the dead in the way you always wanted.
Gael stood up as they placed the medallion around my neck and walked to the door, where a white coffin, absent of chains with sigils I'd never seen before across its center, waited patiently. They did not look back as they stood in my archway, staring up at the setting sun with black clouds gathering.
I will do this, but no more, Gael.
My voice was hoarse, tired. They didn't seem to register as they responded.
Looks like a storm is coming, Phineas. Sometimes we don't even know what we want. It takes someone with a higher calling to figure it out for us. But the rain clears and we harvest the crops. I shepherd them, just like I shepherded you.
They carried on walking, leaving me with the last of their coffins as I lowered it into the unforgiving hole in the earth's skin, staring at the creature I was putting into its arms with one overwhelming emotion surging through my normally numb, decaying, and despondent body. Regret. I chronicle this final entry after a night that I desperately wish to have been a figment of my imagination. A night that only existed in the worst nightmares possessed by those in the deepest circle of hell. That which is reserved for betrayers and ones who commit acts against their kin. But that is where I belong. Perhaps that is where I've always belonged, as Gael indicated in our last conversation. I did as instructed and kept watch over the coffin until the storm clouds gathered and I was forced into the mausoleum for shelter and to conduct my commune. But on this evening, the drizzle outside rapidly evolved into a deluge that, coupled with the heavens exploding, would keep me from a peaceful meeting with my lord. Instead, I would hear those same unholy sounds of retching, whooping, hollering, and shrieking emanating from the casket outside. Yet, something within their tonal cries was horrifyingly familiar and awoke within me the instincts to protect them from harm. Bearing my full weight against the crypt doors, I was decidedly unable to budge them with the sheer volume of waterlogged mud pushing up against it, even as the cries grew more tepid and panicked. Something shattered through the thick top of the casket, and the cries became all the more recognizable. I wish for this to be recorded in the annals of time for any who may investigate. I did not know who lay in that coffin before this moment. Had I done so, I would have sooner put Gael in a coffin of their own making than participated. For at that moment, the spell was broken, and the pieces began to fit together in my mind like that of a puzzle, showcasing the terrifying reality I had partaken in. Of course, I had heard rumblings of an individual that took despondent youths from their homes in the dead of night and sought to rebirth them, devouring them like the body of their martyr and absorbing their essence, their sins, if you will, mocking the authorities with talk of scripture and strange markings. Yet, the authorities never found those poor souls taken, and the bereaved families had no justice or peace. But they shall now. There were never any demons in those coffins, no evil to be purged or salvation given. They were people, young and vulnerable, as they were set upon by the hungry jaws of a predator and their foolish accomplice. I wish I could tell you that in certain plots within my cemetery, you would find the now sleeping bodies of those taken by the one the media dubbed the Antlion of Sturgeon. But it is my sad duty, to my great and everlasting disgust, to inform you of what I discovered upon exiting the sepulchre in the morning, staring at the garden of the dead in disarray. Each plot I had dug was unearthed, each coffin destroyed, and an unspeakable odor emanating from the pits. A thick layer of skin and chunks of torn flesh with distinctive bite marks trailing in its wake. Whatever they were now, they had shed their old form and experienced great suffering in their tribulations. Except for the latest grave, that which contains my greatest shame and ultimate sin, for which my Lord will punish me accordingly. During the night, the storm had become so fierce that it filled the grave to the brim with a murky soup of rainwater, dirt, and vegetation. But the front of the casket was still visible, as was what lay within it. A defiant fist had broken through the front, bloodied knuckles and torn skin frozen in time, bearing a ring that had been passed from my mother to my sibling before they were taken away so many years ago. A moment which set a chain of events in motion that would bring me here,
bring my siblings to their own personal hells, and bring my parents into the blazing inferno that was once our home. I know this to be true despite my mental defiance to the contrary, and the imaginary assurances from our old butler. My sibling lay in that coffin, their fate these past few years unknown, but now ultimately ended at my feet. Gael was nowhere to be seen, but today's paper highlighted that something new had developed in the Antlion case. A gruesome new pair of murders, with a third victim being found alive. They had evolved and progressed, leaving me behind. I will commune with my lord when the sun sets, and I will accept what occurs with full responsibility. Perhaps I will be granted the release from this earth that I have sought nearly all my life. Perhaps I'll find a way to atone for what happened to them. I still hear the soft splashing and scratching from outside the crypt, even now, but I know this to be a trick of an addled mind. The medallion Gael gave me softly hums around my neck, and my tired hands finally opened the parchment they had given me, finding now as good a time as any to peruse its contents. How ironic that Gael would anticipate my reading of this until it was too late.
Time to come home, Phineas. Do not be afraid. Gael.
The hour is late, and in addition to the soft splashing and scratching from the still open grave of my kin, I hear the voices of my parents at the entrance to the mausoleum begging me to open and join them, to come home. I slept for a few moments and saw my lord approaching me, their skeletal hands gripping the veil expectantly. I know I must not tell what I see, but the fright shall consume me long before I am able to articulate. This is my fate. I will now remain here with the rest of the dead, waiting for someone else to dig me a grave. I beg of you to ensure I cannot crawl out of it. Well, my goodness. You know, I have been terrified of being buried alive ever since I became half dead, though I think that would be a better way to go than what just occurred in this story. We want to apologize for the slightly smaller version of these transmissions. With this being a long-standing series, we thought it would be a good idea to get right into the meat of the affair. But rest assured, custom-style Everett Blackwell intros and outros will be coming back for other non-long series transmissions. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out some of our other transmissions. We're adding them regularly, and we'd love to have you as part of the Dusk God family by subscribing, hitting the bell of graves, and you guessed it, more graves, and leave a comment with stories you'd love for my many-legged runners to find. If you want to support us on Patreon, it's as little as $1 a month, and you'll get to hear exclusive behind-the-scenes content, including TJ Lee's unscripted thoughts on this particular chapter and the whole process of the story. But any support can be helpful, regardless of what form it comes in. Times are tough, and we will always be grateful for support no matter what form it comes in. Financial, spiritual, corporeal, maniacal, whatever you want. It really helps us out. I want to thank all of our patrons for making this possible. First, our Sturgeon faithfuls, 21 Keys, Asher Bell, Eurydice, Haley Clark, Jack, Jason Webb, Larry W., Nathan Billings, PRDDL12, and Sabrina Alexander. Our Purple Crayon Eaters, Alex, Amara, Candyman Gloving, Feeny Von Karma, Max, Mike, Newman Borders, Pisky Opossum, and Fi. Our janitors, Alex Nunez, Amy Sean, Arkham Cookie, Death 31, Heather Cayley, Jimmy Ricardo, Sabine Eclipse, Scott, and Scruffy the janitor. Our nightmare detectives Adrian Rodriguez, Ethan Nelson, Fox Clifford, and Gianni Di Lorena. Our void walkers Professor Creepypasta, Rat Squatch, and Val Was Taken. And our Blackwell family members Clue Blackwell, Jackal Blackwell, Kyle Blackwell, and Tabitha Blackwell. And one last time, listeners, close your eyes and breathe with me. Remember, no matter how bad things are, how cruel people can be, and how heavy your shoulders may feel with the weight of the world bearing down on them, Dusklab will always be here to lift the load and provide you with some respite. I'm starting to hear some very ominous buzzing that I think might be Gael, so listeners, quickly now, drink some alcohol-free cider, have some s'mores, watch a video about the history of boomer shooters, and sleep on the cool side of the pillow with the window open and the stars twinkling down on you. Start and end each day with kindness in your heart. You matter, you are loved, and every day is another chance. I'll see you again when the sun sets and dusk enters the station.